Every interpretation of every religion falls into one of three categories: exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism. Exclusivist Christianity is the most fundamentalist, morally dichotomous, intolerant of the three. The exclusivist Christian makes the insistence that heaven belongs only to Christians of his or her particular denomination, that all atheists, Muslims, Jews, Mormons, Buddhists, Hindus, and Christians with differing scriptural interpretations will go to hell after they die, and, what's more, deserve to, since after an entire lifetime of opportunity to accept the one true way to God, they still didn't. The main problem with this is that exclusivist denominations are found all over the world, and each is built on a different interpretation its votaries absolutely swear by. One with equal exposure to each, in all honesty, is not given adequate grounds to differentiate, and therefore the one true path to God is down to a guess. Inclusivism, on the other hand, is somewhat less along these lines. The attitude here is not that their particular denomination is the only one which is right, but that it is the best, and all other religious paths lead to heaven and God, even though their votaries sometimes don't realize it. But the path of the group with the inclusivist attitude is somehow better. Maybe their path is shorter, maybe it's not as bumpy, maybe it's more scenic, but in some way, it's better. The real problem here is arrogance and flippancy. The inclusivist worships a God who plays geographic and circumstantial favorites, availing some people of better guidance just because they happen to have been born in just the right set of circumstances, predisposed and pre-exposed to just the right interpretation of just the right version of just the right doctrine. In one respect, I was very fortunate in my theist days. It was the Abrahamic fold, but it was mainly toward the pluralist end of the spectrum in question. My mother had custody after my parents divorced, and she was Christian, but my father was Mormon, and she could never bring herself to associate with any religious body whose interpretation would lead them to tell me that he would go to hell. So she was very careful to see to it that the message I was exposed to was mainly along the lines of all religions being equal. Now, my parents are not especially good at answering questions. When one puts a question to my father, he's very good at droning on and on from one point to another barely related point until one's eyes glaze over, without ever really explaining anything. One will not find a thought in his head or a word in his mouth not put there by the likes of Pat Robertson and Sean Hannity. I know, I've searched. In 20 minutes' time, one will learn absolutely everything this man has to say. Unfortunately, if he has anything to say about it, that's never the end of the discussion. My mother, on the other hand, has a head full of ideas I've yet to identify the source of. Once she told me how certain she was that Gregor Mendel, in his experiments crossbreeding pea plants, experiments which paved the way for the discovery of dominant and recessive genes, was trying to find a way to help Jews look less Jewish in order to avoid persecution. The way she came up with this conclusion was by reflecting on a Jewish friend of hers who, for reasons I don't recall, had to get her face operated on, and asked her doctor beforehand to reconstruct her nose in the surgery to make it less Jewish. That's it. That's the whole line of reasoning. Another time, she told me how certain she was that, although Forrest Gump came to theaters in '94 and Apollo 13 came to theaters in '95, they must have filmed Apollo 13 first, and somehow, in the course of the filming, Tom Hanks became retarded, and Gary Sinise lost his legs, and this paved the way for the filming of Forrest Gump. Long story short, I learned not to be too inquisitive. So when questions began to arise about the dogma I was being spoon-fed, I never put words to them. They just accumulated within me. The pluralist attitude is that all religions are, in some sense, true, that each captures a part of the transcendent reality. But consider, isn't a religion supposed to be a system of guidance? What if three people are lost together in the middle of a thick forest, and each has a map and a compass? But each map gives a different picture of the surroundings, and each compass indicates a different direction as north. What if in this situation the three people reach the determination that each map and each compass is in some sense true? How does this determination help them figure out where they are and what to do to get where they're trying to go? And why are they so close to the idea that at least two, and perhaps all three maps and compasses are simply mistaken? I could never understand, if God is in all things, why he needed us to go to his house to receive his guidance, or why different churches received different guidance. I could never understand, if all religions are equal, why my mother and I were making contributions to the offering plate of only one, or why my fathers always called for so much more of a time commitment. Does God want us to go on missions, or not? Well, apparently for some religions he does, and for others he doesn't, and both assessments are equally true. And then on the news, I started hearing about different religious groups getting into all manner of mischief. Some were insisting that God was demanding that we go to war with this, that, or the other country, while others were insisting that God wanted us to avoid war. Of course, being of pluralist upbringing, I held each assessment as equally valid. Clearly, God both did and did not want us to go to war. I encountered all different manner of Christianity alone, making the insistence of little things that could get you sent to hell if you did them, or if you failed to do them. And what's more, they disagreed with each other. So there was always some group out there telling me that what I was doing was going to get me sent to hell for sure, and I'd better change my wicked ways or else. And these different groups consistently pointed to verses in the Bible to back up their positions. And of course I could always accept that these groups are full of it, but what if I was wrong? Over and over again I became confident that finally I understood the kinds of things I needed to do to avoid hell and go to heaven, and over again I would be surprised by someone presenting me with some verse buried deep in the Bible, delivering yet again the message that, no, I was still on a course for hell, and I'd better change my wicked ways or else. This surprise happened to me so many times that it stopped being a surprise. I came to expect this message and lost this confidence that even my most sincere effort to avoid hell would ever be adequate. I came to continuously expect that, buried somewhere in this book, was yet another reason I would go to hell if I died right then. This gave me a reason to fear death a lot more than I otherwise would have. Clearly, the path to heaven is a tightrope walk 800 miles long consisting of a single string of dental floss. This is what they mean by straight and narrow. Looking back, my behavior seems akin to jumping through hoops. When I went to the Navy, this turned out to be a real problem. In the armed forces, the risk of death is a prospect with which one is presented frequently. So because I could never be sure that if I died I would actually go to heaven, instead of going to hell to be tortured eternally over some obscure technicality I didn't have the right interpretation of the Bible to know about, for me I consistently equated death with torture. Now that I'm an atheist, death still scares me, but it absolutely terrified me before. The prospect of simply fading into memory naturally pales in comparison to the prospect of being tortured eternally. So here are my thoughts. When I die, I want any organs of mine which are still viable donated to anyone in need of them. The rest of my remains are to be donated for scientific study. After all, the doctors and scientists may learn something from them which will lead to the saving of lives or the improvement of overall health. And when they are convinced that they have learned everything that they can from me, I am content to be disposed of in any environmentally friendly manner. This I prefer to having a grave. This legacy strikes me as far preferable. Some people I've mentioned this to have expressed some discomfort at the idea of having a total stranger poking around all of one's internal organs. But to this my response is, what will I care? I'll be dead. It's not as if I'll feel it. The aversion to death is a thing completely human, natural, healthy, and understandable. It is a survival adaptation. Its basis is entirely instinctive, but its logic has a facet not often explored. A joke more known to atheists than to theists. Each of us, before our lives began, was dead for billions of years and suffered no harm by it. With this realization, death does not intimidate the atheist nearly as much as the theist alleges it ought to. At my funeral, should anyone attend, I want the eulogy to include something to this effect. He lived his life as a good man, doing the best he could with what he had. Sometimes when his friends remember him, a twinkle comes to the eye, and sometimes a tear. So tell me, my fellow blaspheming heathens, what are your thoughts on death? And please don't just tell me in the comments. Post a video response. Let's see if we can start a trend.